Today, my guest is Jack Howell. He's a senior managing partner with Ion Energy Solutions. And for multifamily investors, syndicators, and property managers, you are going to love what we talk about today. He's going to help you save on your water bill and improve your bottom line and consequently your value. And before we get into that, though, I wanted to first remind you, if you like the show, please let us know. You can do this. You can either give us a like, leave a comment, or share the show. And always, we encourage you to subscribe to the show. If you'd ever like to watch the show, you have that option too. We've got the YouTube channel, Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And if you'd like to check out our guest and take a watch or watch the show, you're encouraged to do so. We'd love to see you. All right, now let's get into our conversation with my guest, Jack Howell. Jack, welcome to CREPN Radio.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, myself as well. Before we get going, if you could do myself and the listeners a favor and share a little bit about your background.
So crazy as it may, I decided to get into commercial real estate back in 2010. I had owned my own business before that. I'd actually been in the fitness business. I was a partner in a chain of local fitness clubs and got out and wanted to do something. And everybody said, you'd be good at commercial real estate. And I had some friends that were in it that were doing pretty well. And so crazy as it may, I got into the business in 2010 and that's where everything was underwater and banks weren't lending. And so that was a pretty interesting time because as you went and looked at property values, they were extremely, extremely low as to what they are today. But that was a good time to get started to understand and contrast the difference between, what a bull and bear market look like in commercial real estate. In 2010, 11, 12, I probably looked at 200 multifamily properties that were in some form of distress. And so I started off as a broker and I think I made $25,000 my first year. And it was a real tough road to go. And then all of a sudden I got the opportunity, just because of my attention to detail, I got invited to go work for an equity group that was a developer that was buying affordable housing, and mostly C-class. They would buy, you give multifamily a class and they would buy D's or F's and try to make it a C or a C plus. So they'd go buy something that was 100% vacant or 50% vacant, buy it with cash, retrofit it, redevelopment, stabilize it, and then take it out with some long-term debt. So back in 2012, I got the opportunity to work for this local private equity firm that was developing affordable multifamily, and that's how I kind of got my start. And they said, okay, we're going to go buy a bunch of properties. We've got $20 million to place. We need to do it the next year. Ready, go. And then I dove in, head first. And that's kind of what led me to understanding where the opportunities within affordable housing and where some of the opportunities within the multifamily affordable housing developments themselves as for creating value.
Got it. Well, that's kind of the really hands-on approach, and I'm sure an exciting time deploying $20 million in distressed properties. Were you actively involved in the process to bringing them, or in the renovation process in that, or were you more in the acquisition mode?
Yeah. So yeah, great question. So the thing that they would do is we had this $20 million equity fund, and they'd say, all right, we're going to go buy these 100 units, and I literally had a property in Lexington, Kentucky that had a $100,000 water bill and it was vacant.
Wow.
100% vacant. And so then you'd have some properties that were 50% vacant. And so when you go look at a property, we had a construction manager. We'd go look at a property. We'd walk it once, then we'd put it under contract. We'd walk it again. We'd walk every unit. What are the things you'd look at? You'd look at the hard assets. You'd look at paint, carpet, doors, windows, locks, fixtures, appliances, roofs, insulation, all that stuff. Those all had a hard cost to it. The one thing that no one could ever give me any distinct engineering information to is what do utilities cost once it's stabilized. You go ask 12 different people, you get 12 different answers. How much should water cost? And so I stumbled upon what eventually gave birth to Ion, as I stumbled upon a technology in Lexington, Kentucky, called Fayette Crossings. And if anybody knows, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, but Lexington, where the University of Kentucky is about an hour from here. And so we went and walked this property, and I said it had boilers, it had chillers, it had very old architectural for heating, cooling, and hot water. And I looked at the manager and I said, what are you doing for controls? What are you doing to ensure that tenants aren't overusing any of this utility, because it was all master metered from that standpoint? He said, I'm glad you asked. He said, I've put this technology in to help reduce the water and control heating and cooling on this property. They said we save 30% on the heating and cooling, and we save 70% on the water. I said, tell me more.
Wow, those are big numbers.
Yeah, so when you go to buy a property, you want units, you want individual apartments that have their own utilities. They have their own heating, they have their own cooling, they have their own hot water heater. You can pass that expense all the way through to the tenant. On this one, it was the opposite. Everything was being paid for by the owner. It was a good property, good location. You needed to be able to put those management controls in place. And so when I dug deeper, then I realized the manufacturer was H2O Degree. I called them. They had done a bunch of work with HUD. And then I got on the phone with the gentleman that actually worked for HUD. His name was Peter Rawlings. And I said, Peter, why are you using the H2O Degree technology? And he said, whenever we're financing affordable housing with any of our loans, we need those management controls in place, because whether it's the owner's just paying for the water, or they're paying for the heating and cooling, or they just want to manage the expense. Meaning in affordable housing, if you're investing into LIHTC, which is low income housing tax credit, which is probably the prominent type of investing methodology, the owners are compensated for reducing those efficiencies, for reducing those utilities. So the more controls and management you can put in place to keep those costs down, the more money they make on the rent. So stumbled upon the technology, saw the efficiencies in it. Then all of a sudden you're talking to a bunch of engineers that have clearly defined on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, on an hourly basis, how much utility a unit should be using. Water first and foremost, heating and cooling second, and then being able to look at it second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour, and being able to output actionable data that can define waste, leaks, and overconsumption. So, then all of a sudden the light bulb went on for me that there's such a demand for affordable housing, there's such a need for additional affordable housing, and even the biggest and best in the industry still had no idea what the numbers look like to be able to establish and define those efficiencies and understand what waste, leaks, and overconsumption looks like.
No, I mean, this is exactly why I wanted to have you on. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And, I mean, clearly HUD and affordable housing has been a big mover. And I mean, just the demand for affordable housing is clearly stated, and there's huge demand. Investors everywhere are looking for opportunities to find a property, improve a property, improve the numbers, improve their cash flow, improve their value. But you're the first guy that I've heard talk about how to conserve water, other than somebody talking about putting in low flow toilets and aerators, to reduce the water flow. So let me ask you. So you find the technology. Did you? I mean, what is ION in the relationship with the technology?
So we now really own the affordable side of the technology. So you can use these water meters to build tenants, and the manufacturer, so they work through distributors. Well, we're their largest national distributor, and we work just in the affordable space because we can use the meters to build, but our service model, or our model, is to put this in to give the owners what we call actionable performance data. In other words, we're not using just the data at the end of the month to be able to build a water bill. We're actually using it to create efficiencies. So we can, when we go look at a property, there's actually 800,000 water meters. Let's talk about water meters first. We can do any utility, but water meters were what leaks the most. I mean, what you said earlier is pretty prominent, that everybody thinks, I'm just going to go put in low flow toilets, that are 0.86 gallons per flush. I'm going to go take a shower head from 2 gallons a minute to 1.5 gallon a minute. I'm going to take the aerators in the bathroom and the kitchen. I'm going to take it from 2 gallons a minute to 1 gallon a minute, or whatever the number is, and they think that's just going to work. Well, there's two things that doesn't address. Number one, leaks. And leaks are always where you can't see them. Toilets, number one, and hot water heaters, number two. You can see if a shower head is leaking. You can see if a tub spout is leaking. You can see if a faucet is leaking. You can't see toilets leaking. We as guys, and not to give TMI or too much information, but what do? We go in, we use the restroom, we wash our hands, and then we walk out. We're by the time we've flushed the toilet, we've washed our hands, we're out of there in 15, 20 seconds. And it typically takes 45 to 60 seconds for a toilet to fill up. So if for some reason the toilet chain flapper fill valve gets stuck, it's running for hours until you come back in and either notice that it's running, or you use the restroom again and hear that it's running, and you're going to flick something or open the toilet tank to make sure that it's not running anymore. Typically, when a toilet is running wide open, when a toilet is filling up, it doesn't have an aerator to slow down the flow. Typically, a toilet line is running 50, 60 gallons of pressure, and you can be running, you can run 300, 400, 500 gallons an hour. So when a typical apartment unit is supposed to use 100 gallons a day, and you have a toilet that's leaking and it's using 200, 300, 400, 500 gallons in an hour, and it's running for 3, 6, 8, 10 hours, then all of a sudden you're using more water in one day than you should be all month. And so toilets are your biggest culprit. Hot water heaters are the second. And then we have other data that can clearly identify overconsumption. As we're looking at what we call this micro-consumption data, the cool thing is we can clearly define the difference between what is leaking and what is not leaking, where it's just overconsumption. We're looking at it every hour, every day. For instance, I don't know about you, but I sleep between midnight and 6 a.m. The water shouldn't be running at all. It should be completely off, 0 gallons, and it's not running at all. So if we have algorithms running in the background where if we see water running overnight consistently, we know that there's a leak. If we know that on a 2-bedroom apartment unit, that it should be running 60 minutes a day. So in other words, because we get micro consumption data, one of the things we measure is flow time. We measure it in seconds. Every time you turn the water on, we're measuring how long is the water running, when is it turning on, when is it turning off, and how long is it running. And because we can see this micro consumption data, we know some things like a typical 2-bedroom apartment should run 60 minutes a day. So when we see it running 60 minutes an hour, it's 99.9% chance it's a leak. So right now I have it's 11:20 Eastern time. So when the water's running between 10:15, 11:15 Eastern, and I know that it's ran for 60 out of 60 minutes and the water's never stopped, at 11:20 I can walk in there and find the water's running wide open and find where it's leaking and be able to go fix it in real time. So we live in a real-time economy, right? Whether it's Amazon, whether it's Google, whether it's whatever it is, the internet, we seek and demand a real-time economy. Getting the bills at the end of the month from the utility company is no longer efficient or effective. It's very reactive, and you're looking at what was being done 30, 45, or 60 days ago. Now we live in a real-time economy, a real-time environment, identifying waste, leaks, and overconsumption literally on an hourly basis. And so now we give you the tools and run the algorithms to put things in front of you that are very action-oriented to offer those efficiencies.
No, that's, I mean, like you said, the actionable data, something that you can actually take action on and fix, as opposed to waiting to the end of the month when you get the bill and there's a spike and you've already used whatever more than you should have. Plus now you've got however long to fix it, kind of thing. I love that. Let me ask you, so in your experience, you take the toilet, which sounds like it's kind of the main culprit for wasting water. Is there a number that you can pin for property owners or investors, say if they have an average leaky toilet, how much that's costing them as opposed to, one that's not?
Yeah, great question. So typically the national average for a gallon of water, when you blend water and sewer together, is a penny a gallon. And so a medium-sized leak in a unit in one day is 1,000 gallons. And so what we say, that the analogy I give if an average two-bedroom, let's say just for simplicity, we have 100 units and they're all two bedrooms. An average two-bedroom should be using 100 gallons a day. It's actually supposed to be a little less than that, and I can get into the benchmarking data of how we do that. But if you look at a 100-unit property, and if 90 of those units are using an average amount of water, so 90 units in one day are using 100 gallons. 90 times 100 is 9,000 gallons. If you take 10 units and they have a medium-sized leak, a medium-sized leak is 1,000 gallons a day per unit. So you have 10 units that have a medium-sized leak. So those 10 units are using 10,000 gallons. So you got 90 units using 9,000 gallons. You got 10 units using 10,000 gallons. 55-60% of your water is going through those 10 units, and it's over 50% of your bill. So in other words, you're using 10 times the amount of water in a medium-sized leak in a day that you should be using. 1,000 gallons a day versus 100 gallons a day, you're using 10 times normal. It's very common for us to see 2, 3, 4,000 gallons in one unit in one day. So you could literally be spending $10, $20, $30, $40 of water in one unit in one day, and it should be using $30 for the whole month. That makes sense.
And on an average month, if you've been, wasting the water, you probably don't recognize it, right away, kind of thing. But you multiply that times 12 on an annualized basis, you're talking big numbers. I mean, you said a penny a gallon. It's. I know when I notice it, there's a spike, and it's usually because of a leak. A bill goes from 500 to 1,500. There's a problem, right? There's no mystery there. But a bill that goes from, say, 500 to 700, or even $550 or $600, you might think, well, it might have been a hot month. Maybe more people were doing laundry or more showers or whatever kind of thing. You don't have the ability to zero in and to what is the cause of the increased bill there.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, the thing that we found is water consumption. It's more similar to food than it is other utilities. Meaning we're consumers. We're consuming water, and water is typically not seasonal. The only thing that's seasonal to water is maybe it's definitely irrigation but most of the time irrigation is on its own separate meter, so you can pull that out of the mix as to including that on how that's affecting your water bills and efficiency. But people say, oh, do people use more water in the summer or in the winter? I mean, no. Our answer is no, and we prove that because we have the data to show it. So, when you're looking at, we call it consumption because when you're looking at a property, we're looking at number of units. But what we really need to know is when we're looking at consumption, you want to know consumers. How many people are on the property? We know that an average tenant uses 35 to 50 gallons a day, right? Whether it's winter, spring, summer, fall. That's the average, and it doesn't change, and it's not cyclical. It's consumers. It's kind of like, do you eat more in the winter than you do in the summer? I mean, maybe some people do, some people don't. I don't know. But from an average perspective, from the average tenant, there's no seasonality in water consumption.
Is that average based on low flow green technologies, or is that?
So we don't benchmark which of our properties have low flow installed, which ones don't. Now, I don't own any multifamily right now. That's on my plan to actually own some. I mean, if I walked into a property that didn't have low flow devices, that's the gold standard, right? You take out a 2-gallon toilet, you put in a 0.86 gallon toilet. It makes a lot of sense. You're going to naturally see a decrease. If you're got a 2.5 gallon shower head and you take a 1.5 gallon shower head, I mean, you're going to see a nice decrease. Now, what we say is low flow doesn't mean low leak. We did a LEED platinum building in New Haven, Connecticut. You can look it up. It's called 360 State Street. It was built by Becker & Becker Architects. It's a high rise. It's right up Yale's campus. 500 units. Everything was LEED platinum, right? One of the first LEED platinum multifamily properties in the nation. And they turned it on day one and they said there's 5 leaks. Day one.
Wow.
And they said, not a chance. And they said, we'll bet you $100 a unit. So they had a team literally walk through the property and they knocked on 5 doors and they went 5 for 5. So, with toilets, everybody wants cheap toilets, right? And as long as everybody wants cheap toilets, when you get cheap toilets, and you mix that with water and hard water, all the chemicals that we put into clean water, the chlorine and all the other things that make it hard water, and then you put that around seals and gaskets and other things in toilets, it's going to leak. It just
Right.
is. Obviously from a historical consumption basis, day one is going to be lower than day 30. It's going to be lower than day 365. But if you actually call the toilet manufacturers, they'll actually tell you that their components in their toilets start to break down at 365. They'll tell you
Yeah.
that, and it's just because of wear and tear on the toilets. Toilets work great until tenants get a hold of it, until the kids come in there, until the hard
Right.
water gets on, then all of a sudden all these gaskets and seals start to break down, and you're naturally just going to have leakage and waste.
Got it. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the technology? I understand
Sure.
basically the ability to monitor and stuff, but what are we talking about?
I was looking to see if I had a meter. I don't have a meter right here, but what we have is a water meter. We're talking about water first, but water, it has a turbine in it that spins 2,000 times per gallon, and that turbine has a magnet on it, and then there's actually a little microcomputer that sits on top of it, and that microcomputer is watching that turbine in real time. So if we're seeing 2,000 what we call magnetic pulses, when that turbine spins, it has a magnet that sits on top of it. That magnet creates a magnetic wave or pulse. And as it's spinning, we have a Hall cell that can actually read that magnet when it's spinning. So at 2,000 pulses per gallon, you get what we call micro-consumption data. So now you can get the DNA of when is water running, when is it not, how long is it running, and is it normal consumption, overconsumption, or a leak. So when we see this turbine spinning 2,000 times a gallon, we're seeing three things: gallons, which is obvious; events, when is that turbine starting and stopping, right? When is it starting and stopping? How often is it starting and stopping? What time of the day? What we call day parting. What time of the day is it starting and stopping? And how long is it running? So we're seeing seconds. So in other words, if I go flush the toilet and this turbine starts spinning, and that toilet chain flap or something gets hung up, and I see it running, and I see it running 60 out of 60 minutes, what am I seeing? It's spinning the whole time. I'm seeing 60 minutes of runtime, and I'm seeing zero events, and I'm seeing water flow. So what that means is that the water ran for 60 out of 60 minutes and never stopped. The average, we know it's not a shower. The average shower is 8 minutes. We know it's not brushing your teeth. We know it's not washing your clothes. All of those things, when you look at flow time, it's actually a very short amount of flow time. Even, everybody kind of laughs and says, oh, I have sons or daughters especially, that take really long showers. Even a really long shower is 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. It's never 60 minutes. So, when we have these algorithms with this micro consumption data running, we can specifically tell you what's going on and what to look for. What we have said so eloquently that makes sense with people: leaks have very little to do with gallons. They have everything to do with time, events, and day parting, or what time of the day is it running. When is it running? How long is it running? And when is it turning off and on? I can show you a 20-gallon leak, and I can show you a 200-gallon leak, and I can show you a 2,000-gallon leak. They're all leaks, and they're plain as day. Leaks have very little to do with gallons. They have everything to do with time, events, and day parting. What time of the day?
No, when you lay it out like that, it makes a whole lot of sense. So to install the units, then, are you opening walls and inserting them in the line? Then is that how it works?
Not typically. I mean, we will do that. I mean, the mechanical architecture, the plumbing architecture of every property is different.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can walk into a utility room and you're going to have the main cold water line coming in. You can shut the water off, cut the line, put our meter in line, and be in and out in just a few minutes. Sometimes the older ones, that all the plumbing lines are behind the walls, you will have to go cut the wall, cut the line inside the wall, and our meter is very small. We call it the size of a hockey puck. And then it goes inside behind the wall, and we put an access panel in, and then we're off to the races. So the cool thing is that you can put these on what we call the single point of entry, which is the main cold water line coming into the unit. You can capture 100% of the water being used in that unit. or if the mechanical architecture, the plumbing architecture doesn't allow you to find that main single point of entry because all the plumbing lines are behind the wall and you can't see it, have access to it, or sometimes the water's being shared between two units. Sometimes you can have what they call risers, either laterals or risers, where you're actually sharing water with your neighbor. So then in that particular case, we can't go capture that single point coming into the unit. We have to go capture it at the fixture. So we can actually go put these on toilets. We can actually go put these on showers. We can go put them on hot water heaters. We can actually go put them on the individual fixtures to be able to identify what water is being used in that particular unit.
Got it. So what's your experience when you make a presentation and the property owner says, let's do it? What's the property owner looking at as far as cost? Can you go through some examples?
So the cool thing about what we do is that because we're performance based, not only performance based on the data, but we're performance based on the ROI and payback. I mean, that's ultimately, everybody wants to go green, right? But everybody only wants to go green if they can save money, and it's real dollars and cents, not save a few bucks here and there. I mean, I used to be in the solar business. Everybody loved the idea of solar, but what's the payback? I mean, sometimes solar payback was 15, 20, 25 years. And people are going, call me when it's, you go to any CFO and you say, when you want to make an investment, what's your typical payback look like? And they're all going to tell you, 9 out of 10 are going to say at least 5 years or less. Some of them are going to say 3 years or less. Some are going to say 2. Well, the cool thing about what we do is the performance data, 80% of the time, is indicating a 24-month or less payback just from the action, just from the data. In other words, so we'll go look at a property and say, give me 12 months of utility bills. We'll look at not only the cost of water and sewer, we'll look at how many gallons you're using. We're going to look at variability. We're going to look at a lot of intricate detail of that historical data. And then we're going to be able to tell you, here's how much water you're using, here's how much water you should be using, and here's the delta. Here's the arbitrage between, how much money you're wasting and leaving on the table. Because as an engineering company and as a smart metering company, we have the data that can prove. We have 800,000 meters in the field that we review every hour. So when I look at your property, I have zero doubt of where the efficient benchmark should be. I have 800,000 reasons why. I have 2.4 million reasons every day, because 800,000 meters reading every hour, but I'm getting gallons of events in time. So I'm getting 3 data points every hour, 800,000 meters, 24 hours of the day. So now I can look at your property and say, if I go put these meters in, I'm going to be able to tell you exactly what's going on. And it's not leaks every time. Leaks are 95% of your problem. From everything that we've seen, leaks are 95% of your problem. The other 5% of your problem is what we call overconsumption. So if a 2-bedroom unit is supposed to be using 100 gallons a day, we don't call it overconsumption until either they're consistently using 2 times the normal and sometimes 3 times the normal. We have algorithms in place. So if it's a 2-bedroom unit and they're consistently using 250 or 300 gallons, what we're typically finding is overconsumption isn't a single person using too much water. Overconsumption is overoccupancy. It's unauthorized tenants. You walk in there and think you're supposed to have 2 or 3 tenants, and you have 5, 6, 7 people.
Interesting. I mean, that's a huge opportunity for the management to control the property that much better. That's great.
Yeah, especially when on subsidized properties, if their rent is being subsidized, they have to go right down and say, okay, I'm going to have mom, dad, 2 kids in here, and it's Bob, Jane, Billy, Sue, and Sarah in there. And you're supposed to have those 4 people. And by law, you have to write down who's going to live here. If it's subsidized, who's living here, and that qualifies you for that subsidy.
Right.
If you have 6, 7, 8 people in there, then obviously it's a default to the lease and they can kick you out. That's very important, because if you're paying for that utility for the tenant, you're being compensated based on how many people are living there. And if it's only supposed to be 3 people or 4 people living there and there's twice as many, obviously your utility expense is going to be double, which it makes it very, very hard to make money that way.
Got it. What about territory? You said you're based there in Kentucky. Do you guys have a limit on where you're able to provide your service?
No, I mean, our manufacturer has installed some things internationally. We've had a lot of inquiries on installing things internationally. We've got a lot of, as you can imagine right now, there's a lot going on in Puerto Rico, with everything they through. Any type of utility efficiencies they can create. Obviously, Tesla just did a big install down there to help, stabilize the grid and kind of take people off the grid, did some solar and some batteries. But so there's a lot of focus in different areas depending on, what the economy is and whatever the availability for particular utilities is for that particular region. So, there's such a large focus. I mean, I go to all the national conferences. I've been asked to speak on the panels because no one knows. It's sometimes it can be a difficult conversation. Some asset managers are for these developers are the ones that typically handle this type of thing. Some asset managers get excited about our technology, and some asset managers, they don't want to teach old dogs new tricks, so to speak.
Right.
And they don't believe that their property could be leaking like this. So it's a slow trickle to constantly see data is what the future is and where it makes sense. Low flow devices are the gold standard. We're the platinum standard. We are now HUD approved, Freddie Mac approved, in the process of getting Fannie Mae approved. And what that means is that whenever you do what they call an rehab, acquisition or rehabilitating a property, if you're getting a loan, Freddie and HUD will actually compensate you to invest in utility savings, what they call ECMs, energy control measures, or EEMs, energy efficiency measures, are the two acronyms. And when you do that, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, if you're using $200,000 of water a year, and you put this ECM in, this energy conservation measure, energy control measure, and it's going to be $100,000 when you get done based on this technology, they'll actually take the NOI, the net operating income savings, and actually dedicate a portion of that as additional NOI to pay loan proceeds. So then they'll actually give you additional loan proceeds. So in other words, if we show you can save $100,000, Freddie Mac will take $50,000 of that and say, all right, we'll apply this as additional cash flow post stabilization. We're going to give you credit for that.
Wow.
They take $50,000, put a 7 cap or a 7 capitalization rate, and they're going to give you an additional $450,000 of loan proceeds. When really our technology, let's say it's a 100-unit property, only may cost them $45,000 or $50,000. So, our typical install is somewhere between $400 and $500 a unit, which it's not cheap. It's not cheap as compared to the off-the-shelf meter, meaning the off-the-shelf meter that doesn't give you any of the micro-consumption data. We're probably double, depending on the circumstance. But many times the off-the-shelf meter won't work in any of the applications we'll work with just from a size of the meter. The size of the meter is much bigger. It can't go in the applications we can use. It doesn't have the micro-consumption data, and it's never meant to be used for performance data. It's only used for billing. So sometimes you go to developers that have some market rate properties and they have the low income properties, and you go and say, hey, I'm $400 a unit. And they go, whoa, that's double what we pay for an off-the-shelf meter. And I said, if I could tell you how many properties I've walked in that are low income that have the off-the-shelf meter installed and they're disconnected and they've never used the data, you know why? It's useless.
Right.
There's no data that you can get from the off-the-shelf meter. So, yes, we're double, but we're also performance-based. We're also action-oriented to make sure you're managing the efficiencies. The cool thing is that, like, if you go to these trade shows now, some of the biggest developers are sitting up there at the front of the room, and everybody's going, data. We need data. And she goes, no. She goes, do you know how many companies that we've invested in for our developments that provide us data? We don't do anything with it.
Oh my God! Yeah, no, I think there is a data overload in general, but I think the missing the key ingredient is the missing actionable steps. Just because you collect data and you don't know what to do with it, I think that's probably a lot of the data that's being collected. So the fact that you've been able to isolate and identify data that can be action oriented, that's significant and that's different.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. Just a quick aside. My friend called me the other day and she goes, hey, I know you're in the business, and she lives in a market rate property. It's an A+ property. She goes, my water bill just went up 5 times. And I said, I said, just send me over your bill. So she sends it over to me, and it shows every month how much she's using, and then all of a sudden it spikes. And she calls the management office, and she says, my bill's 5 times normal. And they said, yeah, there must be a leak. And they said, we come out and check for leaks. We actually look at data every day. I said, no, they don't. I said, there's no chance. I said, we'd see a leak within an hour. I said, and now your bill's 5 times normal, and they're trying to blame her for something that's leaking inside the property. There's no way that a human could possibly use that much water, even if you had 10 people living in there. And she's like, oh, we look at data every single day, and this is on you. And I said, there's no way that she could have known, seen, understood, or prevented what was going on. And so that's because it's the off-the-shelf water meter that doesn't provide any actionable data that tells the story, so to speak.
Well, and I wonder too if part of that is they don't have the volume of data. I mean, if you're looking at just your property and you're not benchmarking it like you guys are against 800,000 meters, how I mean, if you only know one set of data, I mean, I guess within a 500 or however many unit property, you could tell which one's up or down, or you could more or less isolate that. But
sure.
But again,
the interesting thing is, to your point, we have so much data that now we can actually take an off-the-shelf meter, and because we know what normal consumption, overconsumption, or leak looks like, we can actually now create quasi-leak detection with an off-the-shelf meter because we know what the data should look like. Even though we don't, on off-the-shelf meter, we don't have the flow time and events. We know what the consumption looks like when it does leak because we have all the micro consumption data from the 800,000 meters. We can actually give you quasi-leak detection with an off-the-shelf meter.
Right. No, and that just goes to the point is that you have the data and the experience and can read the data. I
Sure.
mean, there's plenty of people that collect the data but don't really know how to read it.
Sure.
Well, this has been great. Before we go here, I know that you guys do other things in water, and I'd hate to run past that. Can you tell just briefly some of the other things you guys deal in?
Yeah, so we do electric, gas, heating, cooling. Heating, cooling is the one we do the most. Electric and gas are typically, not too many properties have gas on them, unless more in the north they do, northeast, where in the colder climates because they need gas for the hotter heat during the winter. A lot of properties we go to don't have gas, but we can do electric and gas, heating, and cooling. Heating, cooling is big because if you look at a typical apartment unit, and let's say the average utility bill is $100 a month, somewhere between 50 and 70% of that $100 utility bill is heating and cooling. And so what happens is if a owner can take that $100 utility bill and make it 90 or 80, the delta between that $100 and the $80 can actually go back in their pocket, even though the tenant's paying for it. That's the dynamic of affordable housing. And so when we can go in and control the largest hog user of utility of that $100 water bill, $100 utility bill, now you're putting controls in place to make sure that they're not just setting the thermostat, we're creeping on into summer here, setting the thermostat on 60 degrees and just letting it run. Right. Now in the winter, they're not setting on 80 or 85 degrees and just letting it run. All of a sudden, they're going to get a $200, $250 utility bill because they don't understand. They don't understand that when you go they think that when you go set a thermostat on 70 degrees and it's not getting cold enough, they go set it on 68, then they go set it on 65, then they go set it on 62, then they think that the more you turn it down, it's going to get colder faster.
Right.
And that it doesn't work that way. It's either on or it's off. And when it's 90, 95 degrees outside, there's only so much it can do. And sometimes it can't get your room to 70 degrees or 72 degrees.
Right.
So we can go put controls and management in place so the tenant can't set it on 68 degrees or 65 degrees or 60 degrees. We can also see if we're monitoring the heating and cooling in seconds, just like we do water, we can also see when the heat's broke. We can also see when the cooling's broke. We can do all that because we're watching heating, cooling, heating runtime, fan runtime, the indoor temperature, the outdoor temperature. If that indoor temperature isn't climbing down to where that set point is, we know that it's not working properly.
Got it. Jack, where can the listeners go to find out more and connect with you?
So we have our website, which is ionenergysolutions.com, ION Energy Solutions with an S.com. All of our contact information is on there. I take personal phone calls all the time for all my clients. I'll be glad to give my phone number out there. It's 502-639-0781. And then also email Jack Howell, Howell, at ionenergysolutions.com. So we've got a whole team, depending on what part of the country you're in, that can help you. But I'd be glad to walk through this. Anybody that's in the industry, in multifamily, wants to know more about it. The cool thing is though, even though we focus on the affordable sector, because of the HUD and Freddie and Fannie green loans, we're doing a lot more in the market rate because of the incentives that are tied to it. So, no one's excluded from these efficiencies being a nice shot in the arm for their particular property.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Hey, Jack, thanks again for taking the time to talk. I've learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate this and be in touch. And I hope we can do it again soon.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to it. Maybe we'll do it again sometime and catch up as things transpire. And everything's always being updated and changing, so we're trying to stay on the forefront of that.
You got it. For our listeners, if you like the show, share it with someone you know. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.